Tonight, you're going to hear a voice that isn't real. It will sound exactly like someone you love, your mother, your brother, maybe even your best friend, standing just outside your door, begging you to come out. And if you do, you might never come back. Because in Bangladesh, there's an entity whispered about in villages and cities alike, a spirit known as the Nishi, the night caller. It doesn't chase you. It doesn't attack you. It calls you. And the most terrifying part? It only calls your name in a voice you trust. Imagine this. You wake up in the middle of the night, and you hear your mother outside your door, crying, pleading for help. But when you check, she's asleep, right beside you. So then, who was calling? Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 real stories that will make you question every sound you hear after dark. And make sure you stay until the end, because I'll break down the chilling cultural origins of the Nishi and why some people believe this entity doesn't choose its victims randomly. It chooses you for a reason. If you're into real horror, folklore, and stories that stick with you long after the video ends, hit subscribe now, because this is just the beginning. The heavy monsoon rains of the Sylhet region have a way of isolating you from the rest of the world. The endless rolling hills of the tea estates turn into muddy, impassable slopes, and the thick canopy of ancient trees blocks out whatever faint moonlight manages to pierce the storm clouds. Tariq lived in a traditional tin-roofed house on the edge of one of these sprawling estates. It was a home his family had occupied for 3 generations, surrounded by a dense grove of towering bamboo that would creak and groan in the wind, sounding almost like human voices if you listened too closely. Tariq was 22, living with his older brother Rafiq, who managed the estate's ledgers. On this particular Tuesday in late July, Rafiq had traveled to the nearest town to purchase supplies and settle accounts. He had promised to be back before nightfall, but as the sky bruised into a deep, violent purple and the monsoon rain began to hammer against the corrugated tin roof, Tariq knew his brother would likely be delayed. The rain in Sylhet during this season is deafening. It creates a wall of white noise that drowns out the sounds of the jungle, the croaking of the bullfrogs, and the rustling of the macaques in the trees. Tariq lit a kerosene lantern, as the power lines in their rural sector had already failed, and sat by the small wooden dining table to read. Hours passed. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. And then, quite suddenly, the rain stopped. It did not taper off gradually. It simply ceased, leaving behind an oppressive, heavy silence that made Tariq's ears ring. The air grew thick and stiflingly humid. Water dripped from the eaves of the roof into the puddles outside, a rhythmic, hollow sound. That was when Tariq heard the footsteps. They were distinct, squelching in the thick mud of the front courtyard. Tariq looked up from his book, the warm glow of the lantern casting long, flickering shadows against the plaster walls. He assumed Rafiq had finally made it back, trekking through the miles of mud in the dark. A moment later, a voice called out from the other side of the heavy wooden front door. "Tariq, open the door. I dropped my keys in the mud and I am freezing." It was Rafiq. The tone, the slight gravel in his voice, the familiar cadence of his local dialect. It was unmistakably his older brother. Tariq smiled, shaking his head at his brother's misfortune, and pushed his chair back from the table. He walked across the room, his bare feet cool against the concrete floor, and reached for the heavy iron latch. But as his fingers brushed the cold metal, a memory surfaced from the depths of his childhood. His grandmother, sitting on the veranda chewing betel nut, her voice hushed as she warned the boys about the Nishi Dak. "The spirit of the night," she had said, "steals the voices of those you love. It will call your name from the dark. Never, ever answer the door until they have called you at least 4 times, because the Nishi can only call 3 times." Tariq froze. His hand hovered over the latch. He told himself he was being ridiculous. He was an educated young man, not a superstitious child. But the silence outside was unnatural. There were no crickets, no wind in the bamboo, just the heavy, suffocating quiet. The voice came again, louder this time, carrying a sharp edge of irritation. "Tariq, are you deaf? Open the door right now. There is something moving in the trees behind me." The panic in Rafiq's voice was palpable. It tugged at Tariq's chest. His brother was out there in the pitch black, vulnerable. Tariq leaned his forehead against the solid wood of the door. He took a breath to call out, to ask his brother what was out there, but he stopped himself. He remembered the rule. Do not speak to it. Do not acknowledge it. He pressed his eye against the narrow crack between the doorframe and the wall, trying to catch a glimpse of the courtyard. The darkness was absolute, but the faint light from his lantern spilled out just enough to illuminate a pair of bare feet standing in the mud on the porch. The feet were pale, unnaturally long, and caked in black earth. But Rafiq had been wearing heavy leather boots when he left that morning. A cold sweat broke out across Tariq's neck. The voice came a third time. It no longer sounded irritated. It sounded agonizingly desperate, weeping, pleading in a tone Tariq had never heard his brother use. "Please, Tariq, it has me. It is hurting me. Please, open the door." The sound of his brother's sobbing tore at his sanity. Every instinct screamed at him to throw the door open and pull his brother to safety. He gripped the iron latch, his knuckles turning white. He waited. He waited for the 4th call. He stood there trembling, the silence stretching out for what felt like hours. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The voice did not return. The feet were gone from the crack in the door. The next morning, as the sun broke through the clouds and the jungle came back to life with the sound of birds, Rafiq returned home. He had stayed the night at a friend's house in town to wait out the storm. When he opened the front door, he found the house empty. The lantern had burned out. Tariq was nowhere to be found. A search party of local villagers was formed, combing through the dense bamboo groves and the flooded tea terraces. It took them 3 days to find him. Tariq's body was discovered nearly 4 miles away, deep inside a restricted area of the jungle where no paths led. He was found face down in a shallow swamp, his hands buried deep in the mud as if he had been trying to dig his way into the earth. The coroner later determined that his lungs were completely filled with stagnant swamp water, but there were no footprints leading to the area, save for his own. He had walked out into the dark, barefoot, following a voice that only he could hear, until the water swallowed him whole. The suffocating heat of a summer night in Dhaka is something you can never truly get used to, especially when the power grid fails. They call it load shedding, a routine occurrence where entire blocks of the sprawling, densely populated megacity are plunged into darkness to conserve energy. Farah, a third-year university student, lived on the 8th floor of an aging apartment building in the Dhanmondi neighborhood. It was a concrete giant, stained with monsoon runoff, featuring narrow balconies enclosed by heavy sliding glass doors. Farah shared the apartment with her childhood friend, Nabila. On a sweltering Thursday night, Nabila had attended a cousin's wedding across the city, warning Farah that she would likely stay the night at her aunt's house due to the notorious Dhaka traffic. Around 1 in the morning, the power cut out. The sudden absence of the ceiling fan's mechanical hum was jarring. The ambient noise of the city, the distant honking of rickshaws, the rumble of freight trucks, seemed to amplify in the dark. Farah lit a few emergency candles, casting long, wavering shadows across the peeling paint of the living room walls. She sat on the sofa, fanning herself with a magazine, waiting for the backup generator to kick in. But the building was old, and the generator often failed. The apartment was stifling, the air thick and unmoving. She considered opening the balcony door to let in a breeze, but the smog outside was heavy, and she preferred the security of the locked glass. As she sat there in the sweltering heat, she heard a sound that made her heart skip a beat. It was a sharp, rhythmic tapping on the glass of the balcony door. Tap, tap, tap. Farah froze, her eyes darting toward the heavy, floor-to-ceiling curtains that covered the glass. She was on the 8th floor. There was no fire escape on that side of the building, no adjacent ledges, nothing but a sheer drop to the concrete pavement below. The tapping stopped. Farah let out a shaky breath, convincing herself it was a large bird, perhaps a crow or an owl, disoriented in the dark. Then, a voice spoke from the other side of the glass. "Farah, let me in. I forgot my keys and the door is locked." It was Nabila. The voice was muffled by the thick glass, but it was perfectly clear. It had Nabila's exact intonation, the slight upward inflection at the end of her sentences, even the soft lisp she had never quite outgrown. Farah stood up, her mind racing to comprehend the impossible geometry of the situation. How could Nabila be on the 8th floor balcony? The front door of the apartment was locked from the inside with a deadbolt. The only way onto the balcony was through the living room. Farah took a hesitant step toward the curtains. "Nabila?" she called out, her voice trembling. "How did you get out there?" There was a pause. The ambient sounds of the city below seemed to completely vanish, leaving a vacuum of absolute silence in the apartment. The voice replied, exactly as it had before, with the exact same pacing and tone, like a corrupted audio recording playing on a loop. "Farah, let me in. I forgot my keys and the door is locked." Farah's blood ran cold. The intonation hadn't changed to answer her question. It just repeated the phrase. She stepped closer to the curtains, her hand shaking as she reached out to pull back the edge of the fabric. She told herself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the neighboring apartment had a connecting ledge she didn't know about. Maybe Nabila had climbed over in a reckless attempt to get in. Farah gripped the edge of the curtain and pulled it back just an inch. The balcony was bathed in the dim orange glow of the streetlights far below. Pressed flat against the glass, just inches from Farah's face, was Nabila. But something was horribly wrong. The figure was wearing the heavy, embroidered red sari Nabila had worn to the wedding, but the fabric was soaked and dripping with dark, foul-smelling water, leaving streaks down the glass. The face was Nabila's, but the eyes were entirely white, devoid of pupils or irises, staring blankly ahead. As Farah watched in paralyzed horror, the figure's jaw unhinged, dropping abnormally low, moving with a stiff, mechanical stiffness as the voice emanated from its throat. "Farah, let me in. I forgot my keys and the door is locked." Farah stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the rug and crashing to the floor. The tapping resumed. Tap, 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 louder this time, more frantic. The glass shuddered in its frame. Farah scrambled away, retreating into the hallway and locking herself inside the windowless bathroom. She sat in the bathtub, her hands clamped over her ears, but the tapping echoed through the concrete walls of the apartment, continuing relentlessly until the first light of dawn crept through the cracks of the building. When the morning sun finally broke, the tapping ceased. Farah emerged from the bathroom, exhausted and terrified. She cautiously approached the balcony. The glass was empty, but smeared across the outside of the pane were greasy, muddy handprints. 2 hours later, the front door unlocked. Nabila walked in, complaining about the terrible traffic and the exhausting wedding. She had never left her aunt's house. Farah packed her bags that very afternoon and moved back to her parents' house in another district. She never returned to that apartment, but the terror did not end there. Every night, no matter where Farah sleeps, no matter how high up she is, or how securely the windows are locked, she wakes up at exactly 1 a.m. to the sound of a sharp, rhythmic tapping on the glass. And then the voice begins. The Sundarbans form the largest continuous mangrove forest on the planet, a massive delta where the great rivers of Bangladesh empty into the Bay of Bengal. It is a place of breathtaking beauty and unparalleled danger, home to the elusive Royal Bengal tiger, saltwater crocodiles, and shifting mudflats that can swallow a person whole. But for the people who live on the edge of this vast wilderness, the physical dangers are often secondary to the unseen terrors that dwell in the deep, tangled roots of the mangroves. Jalil worked as a night guard at a remote shrimp enclosure, known locally as a ger, situated on the very boundary where human habitation met the untamed forest. His job was lonely and monotonous. He spent his nights sitting in a small, elevated watchtower constructed of bamboo and corrugated tin, armed with nothing but a powerful flashlight and a heavy wooden staff to deter poachers or wandering wildlife. Jalil was a stoic man, hardened by years of labor, but his mind was constantly drifting back to his home village, nearly 50 miles away. His wife, Amina, was heavily pregnant with their first child, and the distance between them weighed heavily on his heart. It was late November, the beginning of the winter season, when a thick, impenetrable fog rolls off the river and blankets the delta. Visibility from the watchtower was reduced to mere feet. The air was frigid, carrying the briny scent of the sea mixed with the odor of decaying mangrove leaves. It was past 2 a.m. Jalil was huddled in his thick shawl, sipping lukewarm tea from a thermos, listening to the rhythmic lapping of the tide against the mudbanks. The silence of the Sundarbans at night is deceptive. It is never truly quiet. There is always the sound of water, the rustle of leaves, the distant, haunting cry of a night bird. But on this night, the ambient sounds suddenly dropped away, as if a heavy blanket had been thrown over the world. Jalil sat up straight, his senses on high alert. From the thick fog rolling over the black water of the shrimp enclosure, he heard a sound that did not belong. It was the sound of splashing. Slow, heavy, deliberate footsteps wading through the waist-deep water. Jalil grabbed his flashlight, turning it on and sweeping the beam across the fog. The light caught nothing but swirling white mist. "Who is there?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the invisible wall of trees. The splashing stopped. For a moment, there was only the sound of his own heavy breathing. Then, a voice called out from the darkness. "Jalil, please help me. The water is so cold." Jalil's heart stopped. The thermos slipped from his hands, shattering on the bamboo floor of the watchtower. It was Amina. The voice was soft, trembling with pain and exhaustion, but it was impossible. Amina was 50 miles away, safe in her mother's house. There were no roads leading to this enclosure, only a 2-hour boat ride through treacherous, winding canals. Jalil gripped the railing of the tower, leaning out into the fog. "Amina?" he called back, his voice cracking with panic. "How are you here?" The voice came again, closer this time, originating from the center of the deep water. "The baby is coming, Jalil. I am bleeding. Please, come down and help me." The sheer terror in her voice shattered Jalil's rational mind. He didn't care about the impossibility of it. He didn't care about the dangers of the water. His wife was in agony. He scrambled down the bamboo ladder, his bare feet hitting the muddy bank of the enclosure. He swept the flashlight beam frantically over the water. Through a break in the fog, he saw her. About 30 yards out, standing chest deep in the black, freezing water, was the silhouette of a woman wearing a familiar yellow sari. Her back was turned to him, her long black hair floating on the surface of the water like dark weeds. Jalil took a step into the mud, the freezing water seeping into his trousers. He was about to plunge in when the voice spoke again. But this time, the sound did not come from the figure in the water. It came from directly behind him, high up in the canopy of the mangrove trees. "Jalil, the baby is coming." The voice was identical, but the spatial impossibility of it paralyzed him. He slowly turned around, shining the flashlight up into the twisted, skeletal branches of the ancient trees. There was nothing there. He turned back to the water. The figure in the yellow sari was gone. The surface of the water was completely still. Jalil realized with a sickening lurch of his stomach what was happening. The stories the older fishermen told around the fire, the Nishi, the entity that lures men into the deep water to drown. He stumbled backward, scrambling up the muddy bank, desperate to reach the safety of the watchtower. As he grabbed the rungs of the ladder, the voice surrounding him began to change. The soft, pleading tone of his wife deepened, distorting into a wet, guttural growl that vibrated in his chest. And then, the entity stopped mimicking Amina. Instead, from the dark water, from the trees, from the fog itself, Jalil heard a new voice. It was his own voice. He heard himself screaming in unimaginable, gurgling agony. The sound of a man drowning, his lungs filling with mud, his vocal cords tearing as he begged for his life. The sound was so loud, so pervasive, that Jalil collapsed on the platform of the watchtower, clamping his hands over his ears and weeping until he passed out. The morning shift found him curled in a fetal position, unresponsive and shivering violently. They rushed him back to the mainland, where he immediately traveled to his village. He burst through the doors of his mother-in-law's house to find Amina sitting in the courtyard, perfectly healthy, nursing their newborn son, who had been delivered safely the day before. Jalil wept with relief, but the dread never left him. The entity had not taken him that night, but it had shown him his own death. It had let him hear his own final agonizing moments. And to this day, Jalil refuses to go near the water, haunted by the knowledge that the entity is out there, waiting patiently for the night he finally wades in. The stories of the Nishi Dak, or the night caller, are deeply embedded in the rural folklore of Bengal, encompassing both Bangladesh and the Indian state of West Bengal. Historically, this terrifying entity is closely associated with dark tantric magic. In ancient times, it was believed that rogue sorcerers, known as tantrics, would capture wandering, restless spirits and bind them to their will. These sorcerers would use the Nishi to call a specific victim out of their home in the dead of night. The purpose was sinister. The tantric needed to steal the victim's life force, or sometimes physical components like bones or blood, to complete dark rituals for power and wealth. The folklore is incredibly specific about the rules of survival. The Nishi is said to be incapable of calling out a person's name more than 3 times. This is why children in these regions are taught from a very young age never to answer a voice in the dark until they have heard it call at least 4 times, proving that the caller is truly human. But how do we explain this phenomenon through a rational lens? The most logical explanation lies in auditory pareidolia. This is a psychological phenomenon where the human brain, constantly seeking familiar patterns, misinterprets random background noise, like the wind whistling through a bamboo grove, the creaking of an old tin roof, or the splashing of river tides, as human speech. When a person is isolated, fatigued, or living in an environment of high anxiety, the brain can easily distort these natural sounds into the voice of a loved one. Another strong possibility is hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations. These are intense, realistic auditory or visual hallucinations that occur exactly as a person is falling asleep or waking up. In a state of sleep inertia, especially in the stifling heat of a power outage or the exhausting isolation of a night shift, a person might genuinely hear a voice calling their name, a terrifying glitch between the dream world and reality. But does pareidolia explain a voice that knows your secrets? Does sleep paralysis explain the muddy footprints left on a balcony 8 stories in the air? What do you think happened? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true ghost stories from across Asia.